The deepening shadows of 1300s Bruges, an odyssey through the veins of the Flemish giant. The silence of the Bryugge above was a haunting contrast to the thundering, mechanical violence occurring beneath Alp's feet. To truly grasp the magnitude of the great wheel he was now confronting, one must understand that in 1300, Bruges was not just a city of merchants, but a pioneering hub of medieval hydraulics. The city's survival depended on its ability to drain the low-lying Flemish polders and keep the Ray River from reclaiming the cellars of the wealthy. The chamber Alp stood in, the cistern of the silent, was an engineering marvel that predated the Industrial Revolution by half a millennium. The walls were not merely stone, they were massive slabs of blue limestone, quarried from the Moose Valley, fitted together with such precision that not a single drop of the canal's filth seeped through the primary structural joints. The air, thick with the scent of wet moss and the metallic tang of the time crystal, vibrated with the groans of the massive oak drive shafts, timbers so large they must have been harvested from the ancient primeval forests of the Ardennes. As Alp prepared to extract the glowing azure shard, he realized the crystal was the pivot point of the city's secret equilibrium. The copper wires snaking away from the crystal were not mere conduits. They were part of a rudimentary sacred grid that provided a subtle, unseen energy to the city's most important landmarks. The belfry's clock, the cathedral's organ, and even the defensive mechanisms of the city gates. The two figures approaching him were the Order of the Sunken Keys, a secretive fraternity of engineer monks who had sworn an oath to protect this hidden heart of Bruges. Their clothing reflected this dual role. They wore heavy, oil-stained robes of rough brown wool, but beneath their cowls they wore leather aprons reinforced with brass plates, designed to protect them from the crushing gears of the machine they tended. One of the men raised his flickering torch, the orange light dancing off the damp, arched ceiling, revealing the intricate frescoes of sea monsters and patron saints that had been painted there centuries prior to protect the mechanism from aqueous demons. Alp's heart hammered against his ribs as he calculated the risk of the time dilation field. If he used his Arcanian tech to slow the great wheel, he could slip the crystal out without being crushed. But the sudden drop in hydraulic pressure would be felt across the entire city. In the Grote Markt, the great fountains would suddenly sputter and die. In the water hollow, the cranes powered by water treadmills would seize up, potentially dropping tons of English wool into the canals. The economic ripple effect would be instantaneous, sparking a panic that would reach the ears of the Count of Flanders himself. But the Guardians were now only 20 paces away. He could hear the heavy thud of their iron-shod boots on the stone catwalk and the rhythmic clinking of their keys, massive, ornate symbols of their office that functioned both as tools and as ceremonial weapons. The leader, an older man with a face as weathered as a piece of driftwood, stopped and sniffed the air, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the ozone-rich scent of Alp's futuristic equipment. The social landscape of the city above was just as precarious as the mechanical one below. Bruges in 1300 was a powder keg of class tension. The Leliarts, the wealthy merchants who leaned toward French royal influence, were constantly at odds with the Klaubarts, the fiercely independent craftsmen and weavers who supported the Count of Flanders. Any disturbance in the city's infrastructure, like the stopping of the Great Wheel, could be misinterpreted as an act of sabotage or a signal for a revolt. Alp imagined the streets above, the narrow alleyways of the St. Gilles quarter, where thousands of weavers lived in timber-framed houses so close together that a single fire could incinerate the entire district. He thought of the Spanish and Portuguese merchants at the Bure Square, the world's first stock exchange, who would lose fortunes if the canals became unnavigable for even a single day. The weight of an entire civilization's economy was literally resting on the small, glowing stone he was about to steal. Determined, Alp reached into the churning heart of the machine. The centrifugal force of the oak gears created a localized wind that whipped his cloak around his legs. He activated his sonic resonator, tuning it to the exact frequency of the basalt angel's chest cavity. The stone began to sing, a low, mournful hum that resonated through the water and into the very bones of the approaching guardians. The men froze, crossing themselves in terror, believing they were witnessing a divine miracle or a demonic haunting. As the crystal loosened, The azure light intensified, casting a blinding radiance that turned the dark cistern into a cathedral of blue fire. With a final, desperate tug, Alp tore the fragment from its leaden housing. The effect was immediate. The great wheel, stripped of its energetic stabilizer, began to scream as its wooden teeth ground together without their usual alignment. A massive shudder ran through the foundations of St. Donatian's Cathedral. Above, in the middle of a midnight mass, the heavy iron candelabras began to sway, and the monks' chanting faltered in confusion. Alp didn't wait to see the aftermath. He plunged back into the freezing intake pipe just as the first guardian reached the catwalk, shouting a command in a guttural Middle Dutch dialect that Alp's translator could barely process. The water, now surging due to the mechanical failure of the sluice gates, acted as a high-speed vacuum, sucking Alp through the narrow stone throat of the drainage system. He was a rag doll in a torrent of mud and cold, propelled by the dying gasps of a medieval engine. He emerged, gasping and shivering, several hundred yards downstream in the Guden Handrei, the Golden Hand Canal, where the water was relatively still. The city was no longer silent. From the direction of the Grote Markt, he could hear the frantic ringing of the alarm bell, the storm clock. Torches were being lit in windows, and the reflections of 1,000 panicked lights danced on the canal's surface. He had the crystal, but he had also broken the heart of the northern Venice. The fog was closing in again, thicker and colder than before, as Alp scrambled onto a slippery quay, knowing that the Order of the Sunken Keys would not rest until they had hunted down the thief of the waters who had plunged their golden city into chaos.